for kicking us off. I'm Saloni. I'm the chair of IDSA Boston chapter and very excited to be here today. Thank you for joining us for this very special panel discussion. We've been planning this for a while, so very excited to have this happen in reality. I'm very excited to talk to our amazing panelists about what goes into creating successful design portfolios. In the session today, in the first half, we'll be going over some topics that the panel thought could be nice to get started with around portfolios, how to go about it. And in the second half, we'll be going over some questions that have been sent in during the sign-up process and also in the chat. So feel free to drop your questions in the chat and we'll be taking some of them depending on how much time we have left. And about our panel, in our panel today, we have Peter Boeckel, who has been a key person in putting this panel together. So thank you so much, Peter, for that. We have Anson Cheung joining in from Hong Kong, and he'll be in San Francisco soon. Thank you so much for joining us today, Anson. And we have James Connors joining in from Philadelphia. So happy to have you here, James. And yeah, to get started, we can sort of like get started with like brief introductions. We can go around the table and we can talk about how did you all get started with your design career and what led you to your current role. So if Peter, if you want to kick us off.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad that so many people could make this. How did I get into design, or how did I end up where I am right now? I'm from Germany originally, where I studied, we call that integrated product design. And while I'm from Germany, I've never actually worked in Germany. So I moved right to Hong Kong after graduation and worked most of my career in Hong Kong and Singapore, and then via New York into San Francisco. And I was fortunate so far to look at a pretty global career. And I work currently as a manager for industrial design at Intuitive Surgical. And I've built throughout my career products as well as teams and spaces for design teams, innovation teams, or cross-functional teams. Yeah, happy to share some insights here.
Amazing. Anson, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Anson Cheung, and I have been working in industrial design consulting for the last 12 plus years. So I was for most of my career, I was at a firm called Bold Design in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I was there for about 10 years, and since then I've been working on my own independent practice, working with clients mostly in technology products and consumer tech, medical tech. And right now I also run a ID job site called justidjobs.com. And that helps people sort through all the noise to find their relevant jobs. So yeah, those are things I'm doing right now.
Amazing. James, we'd love to hear about you.
Yeah, so I'm James Connors. I guess my career started in 2012. Basically, the way I figured out that I wanted to be an industrial designer is because my dad was an engineer and I knew I didn't want to do that. But I was, I had sort of the creative spark, I guess. And so he had worked with industrial designers, so he sort of pointed me on that way. And so in my career, I first worked in corporate doing kitchen tools and gadgets, and then I got into consulting. And so I've done dog toys and non-invasive neural interface controllers and toothpaste containers and all that sort of fun stuff. And then I consulted with Peloton for a while, then went full-time, which is actually how I know Peter and how he invited me on this panel, which I'm very honored to be on this panel. Yeah, so I worked at Peloton for consulted there, then worked there full time for a couple of years. Recently left to join my family business, which is rotational molding. So living just outside of Philadelphia and working on rotationally molded products.
Amazing. That is super cool. Thank you so much, everyone, for giving us a little bit about your background. I think first question sort of like relates to that is like, you've been in the industry for a while, and you had your first portfolios after like the whole experience that you've had so far. Are there like some few things that you've learned along this journey about like making your own portfolio? If you had to like give yourself advice right now, if you were starting out in your career, like what would that be about, like a few things that you had like learned throughout? Anyone can take this? Yeah.
I think, should we, I guess I'll start. I think for me, in my school, which was Rhode Island School of Design, they really emphasize process a lot. And I know a lot of design schools emphasize process a lot, and process is very important. But one thing that I kind of had to learn the hard way through multiple revisions of portfolios is that you shouldn't show all of your process. And if the process that you do show should focus on the highlights and the key insights and kind of illustrate the milestones along the way, but not have to show every single thing. And then I would say the other major thing is, for me, I really learned that how you present your portfolio and the visual impact of it is extremely important, and probably the the gating item that gets you into consideration. And that was not really something I understood as a student. I kind of was told that the strength of your ideas kind of will carry you through, but I quickly learned that that's often not the case.
Yeah, I would second this. And this may sound weird, right? If we're talking about a designer portfolio. I think for me it was try not to overthink it, which sounds harder than it is. And I think using here and there subtle humor can work. Even nowadays, I look for projects that people have, that eventually little pet projects that are a little bit odd, but tell you something about their character. And I think I learned too late, or I don't know, it's more like an aha moment, like taking the time to explain things visually, even when they seem obvious to me, right? And with that along goes like understanding that you're also designing a user experience, and that's not for you. You design it for an unknown audience in that sense. And just working with that in mind, I think it took a few years until the sort of like, okay, with this in mind, maybe I actually overthink less. So I think those were my three key takeaways.
Yeah, I think for me, I actually had a really terrible portfolio leaving school because I had this problem with hierarchy where the graphics and the graphic design that I would do would supersede all of the process and like the outcome. Like I was so focused on the design and the grid and everything. And of course, like, you want to keep working at that kind of stuff until it becomes more natural to you. But I spent way too much time, like, past the point of like, I need to apply for internships by this time, and I would always miss that window because I would be agonizing over my portfolio. And it reminds me of something that a boss of Peter and ours, Jason Poor, he used to say, the best design is the one that's finished. And one of the things, I think, Anson alluded to it. It's like one of the things that you just need to do in the process of refining your portfolio is getting it in front of people, so that you can get that feedback of like, okay, are things working? Where are they not? Because, I had a portfolio reviewer be like, you're pretty good at sketching, but you literally like put your sketches like this small on the page. And like this should be like a full spread, so stuff like that is super valuable feedback. And you're going to get different feedback from different reviewers, but the important thing is having a portfolio to be reviewed, um, and not hopefully not agonizing too much over it, because it it can be a source of agony if you let it.
Yeah, I think all of those are such important points. I really are like getting in front of like your portfolio in front of someone for like actual like personal feedback. That has been like so helpful for me as well. Um, and like when you look at like hiring someone today, so this is like the next question. What are like some maybe like top three things that you look for at a first glance in a portfolio that sort of like stands out to you and you're like, okay, I need to like know more about this person and like maybe meet them on a call. So are there like any like top things that come to your mind?
I look typically, I mean, we're assuming like a graduate, maybe second job, 3 years experience portfolio. I look usually for signs of process, which if you had a first job already, then this is more clear. But coming out fresh out of university, right? So you may not be familiar with like, I don't know, the various incarnations of product development processes, but you have a sense of that there is a process, right, underlying somewhere, and this creative, this chaos needs to be organized somehow, right? You may have learned that in an internship. So how much of that are you showing or are you working with? And then I'm generally usually interested in how people make decisions, and that counts for like as well as people working on a job, right? Because as designers, we make decisions all the time. We're going to sketch it this way or that way, and we're going to take the feedback this way or that way. And how do you make them on your own, or how do you facilitate to help make decisions as a team? And I think if someone explains their challenges and their constraints that they had for a student project, or on the job, I think if those are sort of very well explained, and like this was the box I had to operate in, and here's what I produced. I think I usually like that because it just helps me to kind of judge this, and I think it actually speaks for you. Even if you had the tightest constraints and you say, well, it was not the best project. Everything was sub-ideal, yet I landed this plane here, and those were the constraints. And I think that's usually great, because if you work somewhere, there's never a perfect project. There's never enough money. There's never enough time, and you always have to land the plane, right? So going back to the quote from Jason, I think those are the top three things I usually look as a first glance.
Awesome. And then yeah, sorry.
I think we're all trying to figure out which order we should go in. But the top three things, I mean, if I were looking for my job in particular, so right now I'm working at, obviously, my family business. It's a small business. I'm the only designer currently. I would love to change that at some point. But being that it's a small business, there's sort of like what a corporate person is looking for. If they're a corporate company and they're reviewing portfolios, there's something that a consultancy would be looking for. And for me, at a small business, maybe something similar to like those consultancy criteria, which is like, yeah, I mean, I just talked about, not agonizing over graphics, but being able to do a little bit of everything is really important. Like right now in my job, I'm doing industrial design, but I'm also doing graphic design and sort of social media marketing design, as well as like video. And I know like it seems like video has gotten really significant in people's portfolios, which is great. Nothing, super polished, but I think it always comes down to just like storytelling. Like, are you Can you tell a good, captivating story? Is it clear? Is it concise? I mean, I think about, when I was working in kitchen tools and gadgets, one of the things that I was told was that a consumer will spend like an average of something like 3 seconds trying to understand a product before they move on. And I think there's something similar to that with portfolios. It's like if I can't understand your project and why it's significant or interesting or whatever it is in 3 seconds, then like you've probably lost me unless, it's just like some stellar renderings or something. But you just have to tie all those pieces together into a good story. I know that I feel like that's kind of like cliche advice, but it really is true. Like you have that small window. How do you utilize it well?
For me, coming from a consulting background and still working in consulting, I think the number one thing I look for is the hard skills, and this can be a hard hurdle to clear. Uh, no pun intended. And it was definitely not one that I myself could really clear when I was just graduated. It took a lot of work for me to get my hard skills like rendering and um, CAD and form development up to a point where it was worth considering for my first job. But when I'm hiring now, I think people's portfolios have gotten so much better since I was a student. But yeah, now I'm really looking for being able to do those hard skills, because in a consulting environment, you're kind of constantly doing that and you're constantly producing those kinds of materials, like really high quality renderings, like nice CAD work and um, good presentations, like good layouts. So if I'm going to work with someone, I need to know that they can do that, like at least to a good level where I could direct them to the level that I would need it. So that's the number one thing, and that is kind of the bar, the barrier to entry. If you don't pass that level, then the other things don't matter. And then the other two things I think are Peter already mentioned process. I want to see that there's some sort of problem solving, problem identification, kind of using a good set of design tools to address those things. I think one of the things that I often see is that people or students are told they need to have a process, but they don't think critically about how it's applied to their project. And it feels a little bit like a box ticking exercise where they're like, I've done sketching, I've done CAD, I've done prototypes, but they don't make sense when it goes together. It's not clear how those things form a design process. It's more like, here are those things. I've done them, so I have a process. But that's what I'm really looking for, is like going back to what James said, is like there's a story, there's a through line through the process that makes logical sense. And then I would say the last, oh, go ahead, Peter.
No, finish your thought.
Yeah, the last thing I would say is a little bit hard to quantify. I think I'm looking for some kind of creative spark where maybe, like Peter said earlier, like there's like an odd project, there's like something that's interesting and catches my attention, or like, there's something really special about the work where, there's like an aesthetic that's developing, or like there's some ideas in there that are just kind of stand out. So that one's really hard to quantify, but it's kind of like, does this person have like some unique thing that they could bring to the table? And yeah, I think that one is hard to develop, but I think it's about like kind of exploring your own interests and being true to what you like and don't like. Because I think maybe we've all seen like very, very polished portfolios that maybe lack a little bit of soul. Like they're like beautifully presented, but like everything looks very, everything looks like it came out of Apple or whatever, and it's like very flat. So yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree to that. What I wanted to add to the process part, I like to see also the things that didn't go well, right? It's like, okay, I did this, A plus B and C, and everything was fine. And then I rendered a final image. But what are all the experiments you did that sort of, ended you in like dead ends, and you had to pivot and you had to do something different, or when A assumption didn't play out, and I don't know, or something else didn't work, and you had to just do it differently. And I think seeing that journey or seeing that illustrated, I think is something that's very underrated, as in like, oh, I don't have to put this in, right? It's not relevant. But the truth is, this is 99% of the job that you kind of apply for. All the 99% that don't go right, or failed experiment, and then there's this 10 to 1% that kind of makes it into that's called final product. So I think seeing this, to me, is usually super interesting. And I would agree on the sort of polished things. I think when I made my first portfolio, tools were not as easy. I think Keisha had just come out, right? Prior to that, you had to, set lights in Cinema 4D, which I thought was far too much work. And so hence I didn't want to do that. But all these tools have become so easy, and then, you can build sleek websites very easily today. But I would agree with what Anson said, right? There is a strong emphasis on, and, knowledge of all the tools, but I see often like basics in form development, right? Why is it this form? Well, there's very to nothing random in making choices for a good design. So where did you make these choices? Why is it this shape? Why is it not that shape? And just basic good form development and how something evolves and has to evolve. I think that's something I've seen less and lesser, I think. And it's more and more tools and SolidWorks, and I can do everything and I render everything. And I'm like, no, that's not the job. You apply for a visualizer role. That's not what we want. So, yeah.
Yeah, I feel all those points are so helpful to hear as well, because I think, yeah, like having skills is so important and showing them is so important, but also showing you as a designer is like so difficult also, because that needs like a lot of practice to actually get to the point where you can show all the skills, but also who you are as a designer. What is your thought process, especially early on, since you're still like working through it? So like, do you guys have any like maybe like advice for that? Because like a lot of like people who are in the call today, they're like still like in maybe like their schools, or they're just like starting out. So like how to maybe experiment with that, like to really like understand like what is your thought process, or like how do you show that, how do you put that across in a portfolio, or like how did you come to this decision? Like do you add like decision matrix, or like what's maybe like a good way of like visualizing that and like putting that across, especially like when you're not in the room talking through the process that you followed?
I I saw this really great viral video recently. It was probably like, something got sponsored and thrown into my feed, but it was actually a really good thing about storytelling. And it was talking about the guys from South Park and their method of storytelling, which is
Mhm.
your story is not this happened and then this happened and then this happened. It's not and,
Mhm.
it's this happened, therefore this happened, but this happened,
Mm.
therefore this happened. And so it's just like this different way of like I think Anson was saying, checking boxes. It's like it's not just and then I did this and then I did this. It's like I did this and therefore I explored this, but I discovered this and it made me, so it's like this. It's not this like this boring linear path. Like we all know as more senior designers that the design process is messy. And so like part of storytelling is the drama of the story, and that's kind of what makes a captivating story. So yeah.
I would agree, especially when you mentioned about drama. I mean, when you send a PDF, and I don't know I'm still for PDF portfolios. But when you're presenting your work, right, I recommend always, once you're in the room, you have more power because now you have a talking track and you have a visual track, and you sort of can have them play together. And I think that drama that you mentioned, right, I think it's something where you see, okay, that whole storytelling aspect now gets completed. There is an animator in the room, the presenter, and you know, the way you present them, you can either enhance that drama or dial it down. I would agree. I think drama is not for the sake of drama, but you know, product development is usually drama.
I think in terms of presenting the process, I think there's two different levels. Like one is when you're trying to get the interview with your website or portfolio, and then the second is when you're in the room and actually talking through everything. I think when you're presenting stuff online and through a PDF or a website, you really want to hit the highlights. Like, I think everyone's attention span is getting shorter and shorter, and that's goes for hiring, not industrial design hiring managers as well. So I think you just want to hit like a couple of those points in the process where things are happening, like prototyping, CAD, and just make sure that you're kind of
final
visually
boss when it comes to OF, right? Is that what they say? Yeah, is that what they call it? Mm-hmm. And I know you saw the clip.
So yeah, you want to show like the key points in the process visually and make sure that there's a connection happening there where it's visually implied how you got from one step to the next. Like maybe you have a sketch that then leads to a prototype and you can see how one led to the other, and then maybe there's testing involved, and you just hit a couple of those highlights. Like you know, if we think about like a TikTok video or a Instagram reel, they're like just jumping from point to point to point, and they're trying to tell you a story in like 30 seconds. That's the same thing when it comes to presenting your work online and in a PDF, I think. And then when you're actually doing the interview, I think you can then go through a little bit more of a winding story that's hopefully not too drawn out, but you can go through like exactly your thought process and talk over some of the visuals that you're presenting. I think one big thing that I see people try to do is tell the whole story in the online presentation. And that often just is overwhelming and it can't be absorbed in 30 seconds. So people automatically kind of zone out and then move on to the next one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think
that's-
like the ultimate, or at least, you know, one of the things that we all used to look at was I feel like there was a moment where Nendo was really like the biggest, you know, it was so inspiring, the work that they were producing. But one of the really nice things about their work was they would have those like little cartoons that would sort of represent like what the project was about, and it would do it in like a single panel or like maybe like two, like, you know, but it captured like the entire what the entire project was about in just like that little thing. So like, yeah, I mean, doesn't have to be a long drawn out thing, especially online or, you know, whatever. But the other thing that I was going to say is to this point about like you know, having your sort of representing your sort of unique point of view and all those things. I think that can be really challenging if you're going into your portfolio being like, I need to illustrate my unique point of view. I think, and I would love to, have a discussion about this idea if others disagree. But to me, it is just about that, like your portfolio, like everything else, is this iterative process. And I think like it is just really about getting that initial portfolio together. Because, there's always that thing about like the artists and everybody, they copy the masters or whatever it is. So like you take somebody's awesome portfolio online and you're like, I'm just going to plug in my stuff and see how that feels. And it's like, okay, how does that feel? Does that feel good? Like, and you will naturally start to make something your own if you continue to work at it. But I think it really is like you just have to have to get started, and just make a really terrible portfolio. Just like make a really terrible one at first, and then just keep chipping away at it. But if you're trying to like capture everything, like put it all in that one portfolio that first go before you release it to the world, like you might never release it to the world.
That's right.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful to sort of like build your portfolio towards where you want to go instead of like trying to get it like to the final stage in the first go. Yeah, I think like one thing that we sort of like touched up upon was like when you're either applying for a consulting job or like at a product company. I feel like your portfolio can be two different ones, but like how do you guys like sort of like when you're hiring and you've been in different kinds of companies, you've been in consulting or product companies, so like how does that approach differ when hiring? Like what are you looking for when you're in like a design studio or when you're in a product company?
I can speak for the kind of corporate angle a little bit more. I think where you also, as a designer, different to a consultancy, we eventually see a product all the way to shipping, right? So there's a part where you, for example, co-pilot this with engineering and you solve these problems, technical problems, and you have to make compromises or have to do all the convincing game with engineers, drive your solution through. So I think that part of how do you convince people and how do you navigate, I don't think designers lead much. I think they'd rather navigate projects through companies. And how do you navigate a project or an effort through a large group of people or with a large group of people to keep design as well, keep it there and not have it chipped away by, I don't know, all the other stakeholders. So I think that's important. I think that maybe is the biggest differentiation to a consulting part. And Anson mentioned earlier a few parts of like, okay, I think things like storytelling is still there, but it's not that you make every week like a pitch perfect presentation, right? This is a bit more, I think, unpolished in that regard. And hence in portfolios, if everything is polished, I get bored immediately. Unless I know this person is coming from a consultancy job, then I'm like, okay, I can see that eventually. But I think, yeah, so this whole, how do you navigate a project through a company? And when you develop, I like to see the raw stuff, right? It's not all, like, for example, I know you can render. That doesn't mean you render every step in the process. So how do you visualize to what fidelity, to what context is needed, and how quick do you get to a point where you can make decisions, either yourself or with the team, etc. So like low fidelity prototyping and just folded paper mockups to hot glue and paper, cardboard, all the way later. At some point, there's a CAD involved, and how do you also jump between these modalities? And then now, at some point, how do you work with this engineering input, right? That comes from that you get from your partners, which applies more when you had your first job. Eventually, you're going to apply for the second job. So I think that's kind of different, or that's a main differentiating aspect from an in-house point of view.
I have a follow-up to that, Peter. So when are you looking for projects which are similar to the products that you are designing where you're working, or is it more about the process and your approach?
For me, it was never about similarities. The only thing I think where I kind of looked at this was furniture design when I worked with furniture, because furniture is just this other animal where, so if one comes from consumer electronics and applies for consumer electronics, it's kind of the same. It's just different company, different brand, different products. It's the similar scope of manufacturing techniques. Somebody comes from consumer electronics and makes a jump to furniture. I think that for me always was the kind of difficult one to manage, because furniture is just this other beast, right? It's not where you apply like, oh, curvature continuous stuff here, and we're just anodize the hell out of it with pastel colored LED indicated things. You hear that I'm bored about these things. No, it's a different scope. It's a different shape methodology eventually. So other than that, I think if you want to work in medical design, right, that doesn't require that you have worked all your life in medical design. Ideally, it's the process, it's the methodology, it's how you work, and that defines what you work, right? So yeah, for me, it was more like no matter what it is, it's just how did you solve it, or how did you deliver it?
That's amazing.
I think for a consulting company, it is slightly different in that they may put a little bit more emphasis on kind of the finished results and kind of the presentation materials, because the reality is like you are doing that a lot. But I am also looking for signs of the process that Peter talked about. And in terms of whether things are, it has to be like similar products. It doesn't have to be for me, but I think it has to be at least tangential to what I'm doing. So I've mostly done work in consumer electronics, medical tech, robotics, that kind of stuff. So if someone were to apply with none of that, like nothing with a PCB in it, then I probably wouldn't consider that portfolio. And I think this is a point worth mentioning, because I have received a lot of portfolios where the work clearly doesn't match with what me or my company do, whether it's me operating as an independent practitioner right now, or when I was at a studio, the portfolio just didn't match with the kind of work that we did. And that can be an instant like selector where we just won't even look at that, because it's clear that your interests and your capabilities don't map onto ours at all. But if there's something like tangential, like maybe you haven't, if I'm doing some sort of medical robot, you haven't done a medical robot as a student, obviously. But if you've done something with like electronics in it, if you've done something with like a motor, or like, maybe you did something that was like big and like machined out of metal, or designed to be machined out of metal, because you probably don't have access to like a 5-axis CNC in school. But you've gone through some of the thinking process that goes into these kinds of products, then that's worth considering. So if I was hiring right now, I'm doing a lot of medical tech stuff. Maybe if you've worked on a student project that involved some kind of medical user experience, even if it's not directly related to what I'm doing, that would be relevant in a portfolio that I would consider.
There's a question in the chat that I wanted to address. It said, how do you suggest students who don't have control over their projects and briefs show these applicable skills? If I want to do soft good designs, but haven't had a project in school that covers that. I mean, you can always create your own projects. And Usually, I mean, I don't know. At my school, we had the thesis project, which was self-directed. Um, I would say if you could shoehorn it into a project, you could probably find a way to shoehorn it into any project that you're given. I don't know. That could be hard, but um, one of the things that I wanted to mention was um, I think I think one of the things that I did wrong in my portfolio that I saw other people doing correctly, and one student in particular, and I've talked about this. I didn't plug my own podcast, the Minor Details podcast, but I've talked about this on there. But there's a designer out in SF. His name's Field Craddock. He's a really great designer. He was the year below me in school, and one of the things that I saw him do that I thought was I should have done was he took a project from second year and he continued to refine it throughout his like all of school, like continued to refine that one project. And it was a toothbrush project, like an ergonomic toothbrush for the elderly. And by the time he was done with that project, like senior year, it was a perfect portfolio project. And it was like relatively simple idea, but he really figured out everything, like all the details, and like the renderings were immaculate by the time he was done. He had done some work on the internals, like he had just like worked what was a very simple project, continued to refine it throughout his entire time at school, and refined it with the knowledge from each new experience that he had, internships, whatever. But it was just like I was always jumping onto the next project and being like, this is going to be my portfolio piece. Like that stuff was crap. Like that stuff from second year was terrible. But when you look at those projects, in your third year, like look back to second year, you're going to see them. You're going to be like, oh, well, why didn't I do this? Go back and do it. Go back and do it. It's much easier to go back and refine something that you've already gotten into the mental mind frame of than to like try and take a totally new project and make that you know, the highlight of your entire portfolio. So I just wanted to shoehorn in that anecdote.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful. Yeah, because like with every year, I'm sure like everyone like sort of builds their skills and they're like, okay, this should have been like this. And instead of scrapping a project, it's just better to like rebuild it. I think like a related question is sort of like, is there this, I think this question we have gotten multiple times, that like, is there like a preferred platform, or like should you have a website versus PDF versus Behance? Like how should you put your work out there? Is there like a preferred thing for the hiring team or like whoever is hiring? Or yeah, what have you seen being like a good platform?
I think in 2025, you need to have your own website. And it's not hard these days with the various platforms like Squarespace or, you know, any of the current providers. I think Behance is acceptable. And I think it doesn't hurt to have your work on there, but I don't prefer to look at designers' work on there because there's a lot of distraction. There's a lot of other stuff to look at. And very quickly, I'm looking at someone else's work and not yours. So I think it's good to have it on there to kind of be part of the network and, get visibility. But I think you want to have your own website. At the very least, some sort of free website where you can have your work up in a clean layout without much distraction. And then I think, this may or may not be a fair assessment, but I think when people have gone the extra mile to have their own website with their own name and like the domain is registered, they have their email at that domain and all of that stuff, it kind of signals to me a level of commitment. where they're like, I am serious about this as my career, and this is something I want to put time and effort into. Um, and that really kind of speaks to me.
I think I agree. I think having your own website is key. I think it's also just it's a good skill to build one, because the whole real estate equation in PDF portfolios, where it's about the limitation of pages, right, is sort of flipped in a website. You have carpets and carpets of sketches and research, and I don't want to go through it. That's the reality. So I think when you build your website, you just have to apply a different set of, like, I can show more, but how much more is really relevant, right, for you to know what's going on. And I think you just have to build in a different set of how is the audience going to navigate this. So I think in the end, being concise is also key there. And then I personally, I mean, Behance, I think it's a good platform. I think it has also grown into finding jobs and freelance stuff. But I think your own website, that's where you just control. You control my attention basically, except 50 competing tabs. But it's different than being on Instagram, where a platform that's designed to keep you on it by showing you more stuff. So I think a website is definitely sort of backbone. And then I think when it comes to applying, I still think PDF portfolios are key for me. I don't like to go on a website and trying to figure out which one is the hero project. Where do I need to click to see really the good stuff? I may just click accidentally on, I don't know, 2 of your sub-ideal projects, or just things that I put this in there. And I'll maybe never even get to click on like that flagship project that has everything perfect, right? So this sort of multi-dimensional I basically can get lost. While in a PDF portfolio, I can either scroll up or down, and that's your best choice, your best shot to kind of just control my attention. And I think you can show the things in a linear fashion, and that's, I think, enormously helpful. Yeah, and I think, you have a PDF portfolio, I forward it to somebody else, and hey, look at this stuff, right? This person in their inbox only looks at this PDF portfolio, so there's a bit of an isolation element that just lets your work stand out, and it's easier to promote. Well, if I send somebody a website, then it competes with everything else that's going on in this browser. So yeah, I think a website is good and it's needed, but for applying, I prefer PDF portfolios. They're more work to do, I get it, but I think they're more effective.
I am going to channel the rage of my podcast co-host for a second, just to say, never take your PDF portfolio and upload it as your website project, because it's completely different formats. When it comes to a website portfolio piece, you have to think about the scroll, whereas the PDF portfolio, it's a different animal. So just bear that in mind. Unfortunately, it means designing 2 different ways of telling the project story, but yeah, it's not a good look to throw up your PDF onto Behance, because it's not optimized for Behance.
I'll also just add, I think designers maybe of our generation have all done this at least once. Don't code your own website. Just don't. I coded my first website from scratch, like literally writing the HTML. I don't know why, but there's no need to do that anymore, unless you're really like interested in coding and like you really want to. But if anything, it'll hurt your website because you're not optimizing it, or you probably won't optimize it as well for all the different screen sizes and platforms and browsers and stuff. And it's going to break somewhere in a way that you don't expect. I think there's so many good options for template websites these days. Just use one of those and don't get too fancy with it, because like Peter said, it's easy to get lost in a website. Like sometimes people try to get really artsy with like the navigation, or like, have things like floating in and out or like bouncing around the page. And normally I just close those. I open that, I'm like, I can't. Bye.
Yeah, I think that's super. Oh, sorry, Peter. Did you have something?
No, go for it. No.
I was just
I-
gonna say I've been guilty a lot of those, so it's helpful to know what not to do. Yeah, I think I had a follow-up question as to like how many projects generally are like nice to have in your portfolio, either PDF or website, or like how much, like I'm sure like you can have like primary really good projects and like secondary okay-ish projects, but like is there like a good number that you look at like when you're actually looking at portfolios also?
I think I want to see at least 2 in-depth ones that are relevant to me as the hiring person, and then maybe like 1 or 2 other brief, interesting ones. Like it doesn't have to be much. I think within 1 to 2 projects, I can tell if someone is going to be a decent fit, if they're going to be able to do what I need them to do. I think definitely don't have too many, maybe not more than like 5 or 6, because then it just becomes too much choice. Like, how do you pick which project to look at, and do you end up on the best one, like Peter said? Those then become usability issues, I think. So yeah, 2 to 4 is perfect for me.
I would agree, and I think showing 1 or 2 in depth, right? It also depends on what you have. I think, and I see that all the time, weirdly enough, that people assume that I know that this is just a, it's just a little bit of the project. You can use your index page or whatever you want to call it, right, to set the stage and say, I have 4 projects in here. This one is an in-depth look, right? And the other ones are just, I don't know, scratching the surface. And yeah, and I think you can always set the stage. And I see so few people doing this. It's easier to do that when you present your portfolio, right? But you have to make it to that step first. So even if you send in your portfolio, just be very, just be very frank about it. Like, this is an in-depth look and everything. And here I just show highlights and that's it. But the people who look at this document get an understanding of how to judge this and don't get lost. And I've seen this and experienced this where people say, yeah, I didn't like this one. This was a very short project. I looked at it and like, well, I'm sure there's more to it, but it was already 20 pages. So just explain what is what and don't let people guess. I think that's I find that good if somebody does that.
Awesome. That's super helpful. I think, yeah, like going into like some questions that were sent in, I feel like this is a good one as to like how to show some work that is not real. Like what do recruiters need to see to prove an experience that they don't have? I think like there was like a related question to that also, like when you're showing like personal projects versus professional projects, like how can you differentiate, or like does there need to be a differentiation of like how you're like portraying like this was my personal work versus this was my professional work? So yeah, like any thoughts around that?
I think it could be as simple as 1 sentence, just at the top says like professional project, year you completed it, or like student project, and it'll be very clear from what you show whether it's student work or professional work. So I think the same points about presenting the project apply.
Yeah, I would agree. Just be very open about it and say, this is, I actually like when people have their own pet projects and sort of, went to work on a Sunday afternoon and just developed a project. And I had a few times where I couldn't distinguish this. And then this person mentioned like, yeah, I kind of cooked this up on my own. And I, definitely blew me out of the water. As in like, okay, you kept yourself tied to your set constraints and went it, and it wasn't immediately obvious that this was actually a self-inflicted project. But I think especially for students, just say which year that was in, right? Or if it's a cool topic and you thought you know, this thing was fun, but you have clearly progressed with your skills. Just be explicit why it is in there, what year it is, maybe what was the time frame. I think that's also important. Sometimes you think, oh, they probably had like 6 month time. Why is it just that little? And then you learn it was like a month. And then it changes the entire equation of how you look at work. Oh, he or she did that in a month. Oh, okay. So that's worth a conversation. So yeah, just I always appreciate if a project, let's say the first page of a project says clearly what it is, right? Often we see like the name of the product that's been developed, and I don't know, it's some fancy name. That's fine, but it really doesn't tell me what it is, right? And I like when it says develop a, I don't know, vacuum. Okay, it's a vacuum. So we're going to talk about a vacuum, and I think that is something I see not often enough done. And just you can lead even with a fancy headline, like for example, I don't know, how to develop a vacuum for 50 cents. Oh, that draws me in. I want to know how you did this, right? But just tell me what am I going to look at. And I think for websites, going quickly back to this topic, it's often you have to scroll for like a few meters until you actually get the end result of what that is, what was developed. And I don't know, I think that always for me is like, no, I'm not going to click on another project. Just at the top of your page, tell us what you're doing, what you did, what you solved, what was the constraint, what's the time. So, and then we can, from then you can go into your research sketches, whatever you need to do. Yeah.
I mean, I also think personal projects, you know, the way that you frame a personal project, you know, I've done personal projects that were just specifically about like a certain skill that I wanted to develop. And I feel like that can also be a way of framing a personal project, either by, you know, how you start a personal project or how you frame it in your portfolio. Because I think one of the things that's really important as designers and that people are looking for is that, you know, you have a thirst to improve. You have a like I'm taking on a certain thing. Like I don't feel like I'm good at this. I'm going to work at this. You know, I think it can be really personal projects can be a great way of like integrating all your hard skills and showing them off, but it can also be a way of like, I'm uncomfortable with this. I'm going to push myself to become better at this, more comfortable with this through this project. So yeah, you know, I love personal projects for that reason. And other, yeah, seeing other people's personal projects and how they work through those things.
Awesome. That's super helpful. I think one question which is interesting was like, how are portfolios changing? Like, are you seeing like some new ways to organize your portfolios? There's this one quote, what's wired and what's tired, that you've seen like in your experience so far?
I think for me, it was more like people is just applying with a website, which, okay, I guess that's, I don't know, when I left university, it was kind of unique to have your website. Now it's a given. So, okay, I'm dating myself. I think, I mean, I don't know. I think for a PDF portfolio, it's still, to me, it's like the good old ingredients, right? That also we talked earlier that we learned the hard way. I think convincing somebody, it's more like, yeah, I don't think much has changed on that. I think it's more like, how do you get into the conversation? So maybe your website is sort of the first step, right? And when I'm a hiring manager and the website is sort of like, okay, then I ask the recruiter, can we get a PDF portfolio? Otherwise, I don't really want to spend time looking at the website and figuring out what's good and what's not good. So I think it's maybe more that the website is just a standard. And then there's Instagram, which if there's an Instagram, I generally don't go. I try to stay off Instagram for other reasons, except James and minor details. I plug your podcast. And, but I think, yeah, I don't know. Those are my 2 cents for that. Anson, do you have a different point of view?
No. Yeah, definitely seeing more and more websites. I think in terms of the content of the portfolios themselves, I think there's a higher level of polish now than there was when I was applying to jobs. Like, I think just the accessibility of other people's portfolios and maybe the improvement of all the tools, like students are really raising the bar on presentation and the level of rendering and CAD and stuff. I'm also seeing more and more new technology being used, like AR, VR stuff is popping up. There's both more interest in those kinds of projects and also using that kind of technology to showcase your work or like do parts of the design process. Like when I was graduating, like you couldn't design anything in like an Oculus. Like the Oculus was like a box on your face that didn't really do that much. But now people are like, using Gravity Sketch and like doing all kinds of 3D development in the VR environment. So I think it's interesting when students push the boundaries of those technologies and use them in interesting ways. And that's been cool to see for me in the last few years.
I was going to add something, but
go ahead, Peter.
Oh, I mean, coming from what Anson said, I think my answer was more so on the actual mechanics of the portfolio. But I mean, what you said, right? New tools like VR, whatever letters before R. I felt there was like a glimpse in time, and then these tools didn't really get established in the actual work flow. But I think, and we had a question like this in the chat. I think ID people also increasingly working fluently in like UX stuff and prototyping a user experience from physical to digital and back and forth, and sort of flexing the design muscle into that realm. I think that's more and more common, and I would think recent graduates, a few that I've been interviewed or coached, it was like, yeah, I study design and I design physical and digital. It doesn't really matter. And I think that's a future of design, that these swim lanes are blurring together. And yeah, you see that in portfolios, especially when it comes to like, I don't know, hyper complex, hyper connected ecosystemic products, right? Oh, there's an app and there's a thing and there's this, but it's one user experience and you're part of a team that prototypes everything. Yeah, then of course it's not your classic ID work anymore. It's also, I don't know, there's a wireframe for whatever app thing you have to do, or there's a display that had to be designed somehow, the content for this, right? And you took it on and it was just a thing you did. I definitely see that, and I think that's also there's a future somewhere in this.
I do think that one of the cool things that I've seen of the way that people present their work is like the Instagram reel or the TikTok. Like I do like seeing those videos, and if somebody's telling a really good story about a project and they're telling it very concisely, and they can put together, like if I had that option in school to put together like a lightly edited, I mean, it doesn't even have to be super polished. Like some of the best Instagram reels or TikToks are not like, JJ Abrams cinema quality, like, lenses and everything. I don't need a lens flare. But I do find those videos very entertaining. I've seen, a handful of people, explaining projects that they're working on. And I think it's captivating, and so yeah, I've enjoyed seeing those. And I do like looking at people's Instagrams. Mostly because I think Instagram is a place where you can be, I mean, maybe this used to be more the case, but like a bit more casual and show your personality a little bit more, show your personal, like rough work in progress stuff a little bit more. I think people have gotten really precious about Instagram lately. like I myself don't really post many things to like my feed. I mostly do like a lot of stories, but I do like that. I like that sort of supplemental aspect of like understanding a person a little bit more because, you know, at the end of the day, when you're hiring somebody, yes, you're hiring them for all their skills, but you're also hiring somebody that you want to sit next to for 8 hours a day or longer. And so getting a sense of who that person is, you know, it might be at the interview stage, but if I can get an indication of like, oh, this is like a really interesting person, I think I'd enjoy spending time with them. Like, and I think that they could complement my work well. You know, that's, you can't always get that from a portfolio because portfolios are, you know, it's like showing up in a 3-piece suit. And it's like, you're not wearing a 3-piece suit every day. Some people are, but not most people.
Not designers, not designers.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful. That's like a, yeah, like different kinds of approaches, which is like good to know because like some things can resonate with some people, some things can resonate with other people. I think we can go into like some of the questions in the chat since we just have like 14 minutes left. One question that stood out has been like, how would you recommend applying to positions in a way that makes you stand out? I feel like I'm being weeded out of the application process from the automatic resume reviewer in some computer software, or it doesn't make it past HR. Is it okay to reach out to people in charge of hiring? If so, what's the best way to reach out? So essentially like more of like putting our portfolio out there and getting it in front of the right people. So like any suggestions or advice there?
I think the first thing regarding the automatic resume reviewing thing, that is real. More so in corporate settings than smaller businesses or smaller consulting firms. But I think a lot of designers try to overcomplicate their resume with like crazy graphical layouts, and they do it in InDesign or they do it in Illustrator. And the outputted PDF might be very hard for the software to read, the software that they're using to process the resumes that are coming in. So I think you're better off keeping your resume very simple, like nicely laid out, like, but don't do crazy graphics, layouts, like different columns, boxes, things like the resume reviewing software does filter out stuff that it can't read, I think. I've heard that a lot. And I've also received some resumes that are like borderline unreadable. Like it, you just need to tell people where you've worked, where you went to school, what your relevant skills are. And then in terms of reaching out to people, I think it doesn't hurt to reach out, but I think you have to manage the tone very carefully because like you don't want to you don't want to come across as like looking for like a side door uh, because a lot of people are looking for that these days to try and like sidestep the hiring process. And at least for me personally, when I get someone reaching out to be like, hey, can I like talk to you about your job posting without much more than that, I tend to just tell them to go through the normal hiring process because I want to give everyone a fair chance, and I don't want to like just let someone who like reached out on LinkedIn to get a better chance because they did that. But I think if you reach out and say like, hey, I'm looking for more information on this, like I'll go through the regular hiring channel, but like if you're open to getting on a call just to talk about what you're looking for, that I'm probably more open to that.
Yeah, I would second this, and I think especially when you're in a corporate, once the process is launched of like as a job ad that's out, hopefully for most corporations there's an element of fairness, right? So okay, go through the official channel, through the official things. It doesn't matter if you know somebody inside, and in fact, you actually say, oh, I know this applicant, and this and that, and okay, eventually that you could say something, yeah, this person's talented, but it will be reviewed. You're not like, there's a hiring manager, but there's usually a team that reviews, and that team says, okay, this person, yes or no. And but the other end, how I would maybe approach this, start networking and get on people's radar before job adverts even are, even like written. Once it is written, it's available to everybody. So to network, reach out, and it's not reaching out for like, oh, do you hire? No, it's like, it's a good way to also learn about a company, learn about a culture, and just have somebody talk about it, right? And maybe try to be on people's mind that way. And often, especially for, let's say, freelance roles, somebody says, oh yeah, I know somebody, this guy that talked to me a while ago, seems to be talented, maybe just right for the job we need, just right for this 2 or 3 months, we need somebody to do this or that. And then yeah, that's obviously a strong sort of testimonial if you have freelance or an internship, right? That's another one. And but I think generally networking and early on, I think is good to just get to know people before. So when it comes to a job advertisement at some point, you are maybe even being considered before this thing is posted. That's ideal, right?
I may have missed some things because I've got a 4-year-old in here asking me questions. So I'm fielding lots of questions. But yeah, I think Peter might have said something like this, but I think it is I think finding people in cool positions and reaching out. Yeah, finding people in cool positions, reaching out and finding out more about what they do, what their job entails and everything, before it comes time for hiring. But I mean, for me, like, if somebody wants to message me on Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever, like, I'm usually open, and it's not like I'm fielding tons of requests. I'm not Anson over. I can't imagine the amount of resources and stuff that he's put out into the world. He's probably fielding a lot of stuff. So, but yeah, if anybody ever wants to chat or has a question or anything, I'm always open for that. And I think you find that a lot of designers are fairly open people, and we're all curious about people, which is why we're in design. And so like, yeah, it doesn't hurt to reach out. Just try not to be annoying. And I know that that's a hard thing to quantify, but message once. If you don't hear back, maybe give it a week, message again, but yeah, like, don't, yeah, just try not to be annoying. But most designers you'll find are a lot more open than you might think. But yeah, I unfortunately actually have to run, but I really appreciate you all having me on the panel, and thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you so much for joining us, James. It was really
Hey,
great.
James.
Awesome. Yeah, maybe, yeah, we have like 7 minutes. Any closing thoughts that Anson, Peter, you guys have? Anything, maybe like advice or just like closing, yeah, like words of affirmation for people who are like going through this difficult process, because it's like very difficult when you're getting out of like school to do this and being like, what do I show? How do I go about it? So yeah.
Yeah, I have one piece of advice that I give every person that asks me about portfolios, and it's something that I think is kind of obvious, but it surprised me how many people have never thought of it. When you're applying to jobs, look at the companies that you want to work at, look at their websites. So let's say you want to work at, I don't know, like ammunition in San Francisco. Go to their website, like literally print it out if you have to, and like stick it on your wall and like see this is the kind of work that I need to be able to sort of do, and see if your portfolio matches up. And it's not going to, because they're professionals and you're students or first or second job, but at least like you should be able to kind of squint your eyes and be like, oh yeah, I could kind of get there. Or imagine you were the hiring manager and you could say like, oh yeah, this person could get there. And then the other thing is, look at the people that work there. Like, go on LinkedIn, like let's keep using ammunition as an example. Look at all the people that work at ammunition as industrial designers, and then look at all of their portfolios, and you'll see what you need to be able to demonstrate in order to work there. And by doing that kind of like reverse engineering, you have a pretty clear set of requirements for yourself. And it could be different for different companies, but then at least you're getting a sense of what you need to be able to demonstrate, and you're not kind of like flying blind.
Yeah, I would all of the above, and I would maybe add as closing thought, have a listen or have a reflection of where's the current design conversation overall. I mean, this profession is undergoing quite some shifts, I think, and we haven't even started. And you know, for example, user-centered design process, it's everybody's user-centered, right? Design thinking is maybe not even a phrase anymore at this point. So the way you verbalize, the way you write about it eventually, it's not about hitting like keywords, right? But it's about what is the overall conversation. Where is design right now? How is it looked upon? How is it perceived in business, or in that particular business that you're going to apply for? And I think the other part is, and I'm surprised that we didn't get this question, because it usually takes 5 minutes until we have an AI question. So I'll do it now. I think there will be a time when this whole AI topic is part of. Currently, it's a novelty, and I have seen very few portfolios where people call it out that I've done this with AI, and I usually appreciated it, not because somebody did, you know, find a shortcut. I like when people find shortcuts. It means you have time for other stuff. But it's a new technology, and we have to engage with it, right? And sooner or later, our tools will force us to engage with it. The piping is already in the wall, right? The AI stuff comes through your Adobe stuff that you already have. But other new tools, so I like when people experiment and, you know, try these tools and be just, you know, pretty open about it, because I think that's important. And I don't think that most design teams have a clear point of view, because it's sort of all new and all emerging. But I think that there will be a point in time where talking about this will be valuable, and then there will be also a point in time where this just becomes the normal, right? And you ideate because you prompt, and that's just what it is. So I think that's something I'm curious to see how this shapes out, and also how design universities, well, teach, train, and engage with this or not. So that's my closing thought.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I think those are like really good, just like bringing it all together kind of thoughts. But yeah, thank you so much, Anson and Peter, for joining us. Anson, so early in the morning for you. Thank you for joining us. And yeah, to everyone who joined us today, it was great having you. Hope you got some of your questions answered. We couldn't get to all the questions, but yeah, Dante, I'm not sure if you have any closing thoughts or things to add.
Yeah, just really quickly again, I want to thank the panelists. Thank you, Anson, Peter, also James, and also you, Solani, for pulling this together. And thank you all, the audience too, for participating in this. Again, the numbers that showed up let me know that this is the type of program that you want, and this is the type of thing that I want IDSA to be doing multiple times a month. So thank you for being here. We will send out the recording by early next week. And everyone have a great rest of the weekend. And for those of you also who don't know me, I'm Dante. I'm the CEO of IDSA. So again, thank you for being here, and have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.